Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Perspectives. I'm your host, Musa Maguire. Our guest today is Ambassador Fethi Ashezli. You mentioned something you had worked on in regards to the Euromed initiative, which, from what I'm aware of, is essentially a partnership between the Mediterranean countries. A lot of development initiatives come under this umbrella, and it was specifically related to this issue of civilizational dialogue. Could you tell us a little bit more about that program and maybe your prescriptions for how further efforts in this regard can be initiated?
Thank you very much. Actually, we have since the end of November 1995, a comprehensive partnership between the European Union on one hand and a number of Mediterranean partners on the other, including 8 Arab partners. Egypt was among them, and there was a declaration called Barcelona Declaration that was issued to outline the dimensions of that comprehensive partnership. It was issued actually on the 28th of November 1995. It is in 3 chapters. The first chapter was the political and strategic partnership. The second chapter was commercial, economic and financial partnership. And the third chapter was on cultural, social, and people-to-people partnership. One of the issues that was very highlighted in the declaration was the dialogue, promoting the dialogue between cultures and religions within the Euromed sphere of space of nations. So within that term, I co-sponsored, together with the Foreign Minister of Sweden at the time, an initiative to which we traveled from Cairo to Stockholm, as well as representatives from other countries. We had Dr. Kamal Abul Majd, and we had Dr. Milad Hanna with us as main speakers. And that roundtable, it was a kind of roundtable seminar, call it whatever you want. Nevertheless, it resulted in a very detailed program of actions on the media level, on the educational level, and on the political level. For instance, we discovered that a lot of textbooks in the educational institutions on both banks of the Mediterranean should be reviewed, should have created a community representing the educational institutions on both sides that would go into details and see what kind of picture is being projected by the textbooks on both sides of the other. What kind of picture of the other? How could we clean the textbooks of any misinformation? And we identified a lot of misinformation elements. The media. I remember having identified only about 11 or 12 movies made through 25 years by Hollywood, of hundreds of films projecting Arabs, projecting Muslims in the worst picture you can imagine.
What do you think is the cause behind that?
This part of the world was colonialized by the West. Western powers came to the Orient under the slogan that they were the people who would bring this barbaric part of the world into civilization.
We still hear that sometimes.
Sometimes we are still hearing this. Nevertheless, they wanted to justify their greed intentions, their greedy intentions, they wanted to justify. of course, they were motivated by conflicts among themselves, by competition among themselves. They were motivated by materialistic benefits they wanted to extract from our countries. But in order to address the public opinion, their public opinion, and other nations, they were claiming that they were playing the civilizer role, which was not true, of course.
Of course, a lot of the, I suppose you could say, efforts at development, the programs of development, historically within the recent century, late 20th century, have dealt with a similar theme in terms of, developing this part of the world, developing certain values. Now, within a lot of these efforts, you have major institutions, major state institutions involved. What is the role of such institutions in facilitating dialogue? Last time we talked about Al-Azhar in Egypt. You felt that these institutions have not done a good enough job in facilitating dialogue. What would your prescription be for those kind of institutions in Egypt and elsewhere in terms of possibly reaching out for counter-development initiatives in the West to teach the people of the West about the true nature of Islam and so on?
I have to hail here a Turkish initiative that was taken in January 2002, few months after the terrorist attacks on New York and Washington. That initiative was to convene a meeting of the ministers of foreign affairs of both the Muslim group, the OIC countries, and of the European Union countries. It was supposed to be a continuous process. Again, there was a failure here because it stopped immediately after the meeting was over. We stopped hearing anything about it. And while it was meant to become a process, that would bring me to the OIC. You keep within the sphere of interest of countries of the OIC, you keep hearing about Muslim free trade area.
We've
I
dealt with
regard
this
this.
before,
Yeah, I was assistant foreign minister who was dealing with European affairs, and before that, I was ambassador to Saudi Arabia and permanent representative to the Organization of the Islamic Conference. I believe that the most sacred bond among Muslims should be the cultural affinities, should be Al-Kitab, should be Al-Quran, should be the teachings of the Prophet. Because the diversity of the spectrum of Islam now, it encompasses the whole world. You find a Muslim community in the United States, in Scandinavia, everywhere. So how come that you would like to give materialistic interpretations to this? What kind of common economic interests would exist between Senegal, for instance, and Indonesia? I believe that the OIC should create at the Secretariat of the OIC a special unit for the cause of dialogue between cultures. And that process, dialogue between cultures, should be embarked upon among Muslims first, because our perception of the cause in West Africa could be different from our perception of that cause in Indonesia, in the Middle East. So we have to agree first about our perception as Muslims of the cause of dialogue between civilizations and between cultures. And then we start talking about this, we start interacting with the followers of other religions and other cultures. I believe that we have tools. We have to use those tools. We have the satellite TV, we have special internet sites, but we have to use the language of the century, the current language. Again, I would refer to the very deplorable cartoons depicting Prophet Muhammad by one of the Danish newspapers. I was reading about the background. I was reading some of the declarations given by muftis, by Danish Muslim muftis. They were speaking the language of the 6th century. You cannot tell the people in the 21st century something that could be rationalized in the 7th century or the 8th century in order to have receptivity by others. You have to reach their minds.
Ambassador, we have to go to a short break now, but you bring up an interesting topic in terms of dealing in contemporary language, speaking to people in contemporary language. So I want to get back to that after the break. Please stay with us. Assalamu alaikum.
The more you hear about it, the more you desire to prepare for it. Life after death. Journey of the soul. The day of resurrection. The torment of the hellfire. The reward of paradise. Stay tuned for a life-changing, heart-softening, spiritually uplifting series about the hereafter exclusively on Peace TV.
Know the vivid descriptions of paradise and hellfire from the Quran and authentic ahadith, and acquire life-changing habits to be successful in the hereafter. Every Tuesday at 6 p.m. and repeat telecast at 5:30 a.m. Saudi Arabia on Peace TV.
A friendly message by Dr. Zakir. Win over your enemy.
In this age of hatred and animosity, our all-loving Creator has prescribed the formula for winning over your enemy in the glorious Quran, in Surah Fussilat, chapter 41, verse number 34. Nor can goodness and evil be equal. Repel evil with what is better. You will see that he with whom you had enmity will become your close friend. Do not defeat your enemies, but rather win them over. Win their hearts and win their minds.
Peace TV, the solution for humanity.
Explore the wisdom and balance of Islamic law. And the genius of Muslim jurists who distilled the essence of the law into short statements of potent meaning. So join me, Riaz Ansari, for a survey of Islamic legal maxims.
Appreciate the accountability of Islamic laws against all manner of corrupt practices in Islamic legal maxims with Riaz Ansari every Saturday at 5:30 p.m. and repeat telecast at 11:30 a.m. Saudi Arabia on Peace TV.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Perspectives. Our guest today is Ambassador Fethi Ashezli. Before the break, we were talking about dealing with people in the world, initiating this civilizational dialogue in the contemporary language, the language of today. I was wondering if you could give us a bit more of a concrete example of what you mean by this, and maybe perhaps explain the way you feel Muslims have failed in this regard.
I will give you one example, specific one. One of the muftis of the Muslims in Denmark was calling on the Danish government to accept the Islamic way of compensation for life. If, for instance, you make an accident, traffic accident, and you kill a person in the street, he wanted to that the Danish government should legalize the Islamic diya. And he was calling on the government.
This is blood money?
Blood money.
Yeah.
Blood money. And he was calling on the government to accept, to introduce this into the Danish law, accepting a number of camels for the blood money. Of course, I cannot imagine the Danish parliament issuing such a law. And there was more than one mufti. Before we started this recording, we were talking about the fatwa and how fatwa should be restricted to the people who know very well theology, who know religious sciences, and they should be as good in this as in other. Or we can have a panel of fatwa, a panel that would include economists, that would include life scientists, biology scientists, etc. Because Islam should be good for everybody, anywhere, everywhere, anytime. If we keep talking in the terms of the 6th century, we'll waste one of the essences of Islam.
One of the phenomenon you've talked about in terms of the world opening up, speaking a new language, of course, is the rise of satellite television. Many other new media exist which allow many voices to compete within either the television space. The question I want to ask, in light of what you just mentioned, in many ways this allows for an unprecedented level of dialogue, unprecedented level of debate on issues that perhaps before were silenced or at least were not heard. But maybe there's another side to it, a downside, in the sense that unqualified information is given the same platform as qualified or established information. What would be your critique in this regard? Do you think that there's a problem that we need to exert more controls over information?
By all means. And of course, those people, those terrorists, those who represent fanaticism among our ranks, they should be excluded. So, al-fatwa should be controlled, should be exercised with this background in mind.
You mentioned the OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, and your perspective on maybe slowing down some of the initiatives to erode the interstate barriers, especially with regards to trade, the Islamic free market. Would the area of fatwa be an area that greater cooperation would benefit the Muslims, in the sense that instead of drawing our fatwa from specific regions or specific national institutions, we should try to create an international body that is perhaps outside of individual state control, maybe within the OIC, to issue fatwa on these contemporary issues? Is that something you would favor?
I would like to have, because domestic, I was talking about the viability in Islam and advisability of Islam in anywhere in the world, everywhere in the world. Because I wish to emphasize the domestic nature, because Islam now is being adopted by people in the Western Hemisphere, in Antarctica, in the, I don't know, in very different environment. You cannot tell me that I should follow fasting terms in Saudi Arabia the same way I should do in the northern pole area, where you can have no sunset, you can have 24 hours a day. You have to regulate it. You have to take into consideration the domestic implications. Nevertheless, there should be a kind of federation or a kind of ruling body that should coordinate and overview the domestic fatwa councils
within individual countries.
Within individual countries or within regional areas.
Is there a way to include Muslims who live in the West, or perhaps is there already a mechanism within groups like the OIC for those Muslims who are not represented by individual historically Muslim nation states? Is there a way to include them in the processes of these organizations?
Of course. This is a very valid point, because we have now on European soil, we have 4-5 million Muslims. We have to hear their worries. We have to address their queries. And because in fact they would be a kind of facade of the Islamic world to the West and in Europe.
Is there any barrier to this process? Let's go back to the idea of dialogue for a minute. Of course, practically the way things work in international relations, individual nations will represent their efforts to teach Islam to the West or to show diplomatic efforts towards the West. Is there any problem in terms of the competition, you could say, between individual nation states? Maybe there are differences of opinion when you look in the wide diversity of regions in the Muslim world, in terms of how their effort is being portrayed to other countries, especially in the West. Is there any sort of infighting or any problems created between countries that could serve more unification?
No, made reference to the OIC as a kind of umbrella for the Islamic world. Right. And that's why I suggested that umbrella should be reinforced through creating a special unit that would concentrate on dialogue between cultures, because of the very important status of this issue in the present status of international affairs. It is becoming of much more important position on the list of interests of nations. But I can give you example about the different perceptions of Muslim countries. When the famous movie producer Al-Aqad, I think Al-Aqad was an American of Syrian origin, when he passed away in the terrorist attacks of Amman in November, most of the TV stations in the Arab world were showing his films. One of his greatest movies was Ar-Risala, a message about Islam. That film, that specific film, has never been shown on Egyptian screens because of the objection of certain quarters on portraying Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet. So the film was not shown on Egyptian TV, while it was shown on other Arab TVs, including Saudi TVs, NBC and the rest. That's why I said, if we should be effective in dialoguing with the followers of other religions and other civilizations, we have to come to terms about what are the terms, what are the picture, the common picture we should be propagating among when we talk about to the outside world.
As we come to the close of this program, I want to go full circle back to some of our initial discussions in terms of civilizational dialogue. You've mentioned several times the issue of extremism, which of course exists in the Muslim world. We talked about the idea, the portrayals at least, that extremism is something essential to Islam or related fundamentally to Islam. In your view, as basically closing words, who do you think really benefits from extremism?
I think the enemies of Islam, those who were keen to depict Islam as the new enemy of the West, I would say that those people, those terrorists, those extremists, they are working to the benefit of certain quarters that would have enmity against Muslims.
Well, Ambassador, I want to thank you very much for joining us on this program. It's been a great benefit to hear from you on all of these issues. Our guest has been Ambassador Fethi Ashezli. We appreciate him joining us, and we appreciate you joining us on today's episode. Please stay tuned for future episodes of Perspectives. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.